underdog groups versus underdog individuals. Oppressed people groups consist of alphas and underdogs, just like privileged groups. The untouchables of India's caste system have their leaders, influencers, and their alphas, even though as a whole they have a sort of underdog compared to upper castes. When I see underprivileged groups excel over their oppressors and rulers, I also see creative innovation among other benefits. In addition to this boon, I must stress the fact that every community, whether we are living in a ruling class or some kind of vulnerable group, is made up of leaders and followers within ourselves. Therefore, this principle must apply not only to groups but to individuals. I have witnessed a lot of sincere but futile efforts being made to bring visibility and empowerment to marginalized populations. Based on my dealings with these efforts, one outcome is always the same. They are picking the alphas from an underdog community. The good thing about these efforts is that these underdog groups of underprivileged outcasts do indeed have a more difficult time being recognized compared to what I might reluctantly refer to as the ruling class. This is indeed a boon, a good thing, considering the fact that even a powerful alpha type can possess creative abilities that may have resulted from being trapped within an oppressed community. The downside to this, especially considering my perspective, is that we are still giving too much attention to these born leader types who have a natural ability to gain and hold the attention of others, and thus not addressing the root of the issue while advocating for groups, not individuals. I consider myself to have existed for most of my life in communities that are toward the top of the ruling classes of the world. The common opinion seems to be that power would come easily to me. However, that is rare, and if it does happen, it is in the context of being surrounded by those in some kind of lower caste. I currently live near the Mexican border. In the United States, most places I go are environments where I have to function near the bottom of whatever pecking order I am in. Once I go to a less privileged country like Mexico, I feel like a king. It's a strange feeling compared to what I normally experience. I also spent nearly 3 months in the Russian Federation when I was younger. There was a constant projection of perceived power placed on me, as if I had some kind of value just because of where I was born. Returning to the United States, I endured a lot of culture shock, even more than when I had been leaving my country. Up until now, I realize why it was so hard for me to adjust back to American culture, for the simple fact that neither I nor anyone around me considered the fact that I was valued way less as a human being in my home country. Perceived privilege. This brings me to something that I call perceived privilege. It is where I am living among various people with various degrees of privileges and a lack of privilege in different aspects. It is often marked with economic, racial, cultural, age, gender, and a lot of other barriers to determine whether someone is treated fairly or not. What is not so apparent, especially with me, is having to live with barriers of my own. Being a sexual minority, in addition to the constant ableism that comes from living with chronic condition, specifically symptoms that are rarely ever apparent, with these traits that could make things difficult for me in some ways, the biggest barrier to me being treated with equality and respect is that I did not possess the ability to be some kind of born leader. Often it's simply just being alone that causes others to treat me with disrespect and unfairness. My underdog characteristics are a combination of a lot of traits, most of which are things that are impossible to change on my own, that enable me to remain at the bottom of a social ranking system among peers. Therefore, in my experience throughout most of my life, although I am perceived as someone who is very privileged, and the outcome rarely reflects my perceived privilege. It is also in the context of what particular environment I happen to be in and what kind of social rank I am put into. One of the many problems about being me is that I have so many contradictory traits that most people, especially other men, have a hard time placing me in their mental pecking order, although sometimes comical and most of the time totally unnoticed by other people within social situations. The irony of a poor, confused fellow trying to evaluate in his mind if he is to follow or lead, or if he is to value or devalue me, seems to fluctuate. Another thing that is horribly wrong with me is that since the age of 13, I developed a coping mechanism when trapped in a place full of overly educated, high-minded people. Unless these kinds of people recognize someone's impressive credentials, they assume everyone else is a complete idiot. As a result of this pathology, I would put on a whimsical act of pretending to be significantly stupid and see if anybody else notices that I am actually taunting them. This coping mechanism simply does not work in a room full of snobs. They will not be able to tell the difference between satire and stupidity and remain in a trance-like state where they are compelled to educate me on a first-grade level. After pointing out the obvious, this is often followed by others in the room continuing to humiliate me until they feel like they have done their heroic civil duty. Chances are someone in the room will pick up on this act, and I will have gained their respect. However, they never dare to point out what's actually going on. Over the years, I have developed this childhood coping mechanism instead of what most people would do, abandon it. I'm all grown up, and I don't need to mess with people like that, but it's so fun, and it still works, and perhaps one day I'll finally grow out of it. As part of my developing my satirical behaviors, I will wait until Mr. Smarty Pants introduces a subject that he assumes I know nothing about. This is where things start to get nasty, really nasty. And in front of everyone, I begin to ask professional and industry-related questions directed to this layman's terms that he's saying. In addition, I start to fill in any relevant missing details. As the conversation is winding down, I might add something to the effect of, I actually don't know what I'm talking about, and I am making up all this stuff. It's just that I somehow am extremely lucky, and I happen to get all the facts right. But then again, who does fact-checking anyways these days? It's not like we carry some magic pocket-sized device that enables us to access information like this. I just stumped once again a room full of overly educated elitists, and they reply with a blank stare. One of the things that overrated people hate the most about underrated people is that when an underrated person does things that are significantly impressive. This is the most true when there's an alpha dog type person who convinces everyone that they are valuable, when in the same setting, there's an underdog type person who actually delivers. Did Courtney Love literally kill Kurt Cobain? Did Richard Carpenter literally kill Karen Carpenter? Did Roger Waters literally kill Sid Barrett? Did Edison murder Tesla? No. However, all these talented people suffered and died with their less gifted counterparts, gained more power, attention, and success, and if not, at least they outlived them. A stranger story is about a so-called mental health worker named Eugene Landy. Jealous alphas who, in various ways, somehow drained the lifeblood out of their underdogs, and very few people seem to go into depth about enough to find out what really happened. I have studied the lives of gifted individuals enough to recognize these patterns, and sadly, most of my discussions are not considered unless heard by a human underdog. And this was written during the loss of a talented boy on the beach, Brian Wilson. So thanks to the intervention of a compassionate woman, he survived the death sentence that Dr. Landy prescribed him. Let's talk about gods. Clapton is God was a famous phrase that was painted on a wall in London in the mid-1960s. I personally believe that statements like this give me insight into what a god really is. Any name or voice associated with somebody in real life or not who seems to be really powerful and impressive. Whether a god or a goddess actually created the earth, the universe, canned beans, or whatever is another discussion. The fact about deities is that throughout history, and especially prehistory, people really liked stuff like that, and it seemed to help them and give them explanations before there was much of anything that we would call science. Although nothing is essentially wrong with faith, spirituality, and religion, unfortunately, they can also be tools that greedy leaders can use to deceive and manipulate their followers. On the other hand, it is also something that followers can use to exploit their leaders as well. I don't think Eric Clapton wanted to be a god. He just happened to get a job as one of those many white blues guitarists and got successful. The lout that painted that stupid and iconic thing there probably never actually heard a real black blues guitar player. However, I must admit that I'm glad it was painted. It revealed to the world that rock music was becoming a sort of religion, and a religion needs gods. Many young people at that time in history were leaving their churches and focusing on nightclubs as their sort of places of worship. My favorite point about the whole rock gods concept is that it's an example of how a group of followers can deify a leader. There are also countless examples of leaders deifying themselves. Prehistory gives us enough evidence because of forms of ancestor worship that it has been customary for thousands of years to regard various leaders as gods. It is also widely recognized that myths and legends often originated from oral history and thus were either distorted through time or by other means. The childhood game of telephone is a good example of whispering into someone's ear over and over and again until the kids laugh and at the final outcome. As we know, it only takes one kid to change a statement, even if all the children listen and repeat it perfectly. The more there was a tendency to venerate their ancestors, the more the stories would be embellished with sensational imagery. When ancient civilizations began to develop the written word, this was not only a good opportunity to solidify facts for future generations, it was also used as another tool to further distort facts. But whether an ancient leader was deified or deified themselves, I am certain that most of these legends and myths originated in various kinds of real-life historical events. That being said, I often wonder about what really happened to inspire what we know today as Greek and Roman gods. Little to nothing has been widely spread about such speculation. Therefore, I can only imagine, based on what I know about prehistory, what kinds of events actually occurred. When hyper-alpha type leaders gain or are given too much power over others, a lot of very typical things happen. As a result of the abuse of power and the addiction of power, there is suffering as a result, mostly on behalf of their subjects. Another byproduct of enabling these gods, whether living or historical, is a tendency for their devotees to protect them. One way to tell them is to make any obvious or subtle gestures undermining their importance, or just outright mocking them. This will often cause an anger response. Anger protects idols. In a biblical account based on the books of 1st and 2nd Kings, Phoenician Princess Jezebel, who was one of the wives of King Ahab, was very defensive of her gods and idols, even trying to kill others who dared to challenge her beloved deities. We also see this righteous indignation throughout church history, trying to defend the God of Old and New Testaments, featuring historic events like the Crusades and the Inquisition. It's obvious that there are a lot of religious devotees can react very defensively when their God is challenged or mocked, as if their God needs help. I have noticed this with just about anything and everything that can be considered a god or idol. I used to work for a wealthy man who identified himself as an atheist. One time during a rehearsal in his basement, I said something funny about a piece of ancient Hindu art he had posted on the wall. I don't know what I said, but I'm guessing it was one of those blue-skinned gods that I must have made a reference to a Smurf. This self-proclaimed atheist got angry, and I thought it was interesting that even an unbeliever could defend a god. Likewise, he was also known to defend his beloved and dead Jerry Garcia in addition to his other idols. Because of my background in advanced forms of music theory and composition, I've always considered most rock and roll music to be generally stupid. And although I listen to a lot of it, I don't take it very seriously. This has also prompted a lot of rock fans, especially classic rock fans, to get very angry while I poke fun at their fake and pretend white blues guitarists, the glamour, the privilege, the ignorance, and unrepentantly committing rock blasphemy on a regular basis. As many rock fans and rock stars are now well into their 80s, They resemble the Crusaders and various figures from what we would consider to be the Dark Ages. This world is made up of leaders and followers. At the top is the alpha, at the bottom is the runt. Everyone in the middle is some kind of an ever-changing pecking order. With these leaders, people are taught to give their attention, their resources, and even their allegiance to these idols. Our gods can be politicians, teachers, preachers, entertainers, and sometimes just a name, an image, or a still small voice. These powerful entities, in whatever form they might take in our lives, gain their positions through love and fear, or whatever works. Followers defend and protect them and probably never really know why they do so. This principle also applies to anyone who happens to get a significant amount of attention. There are a lot of times in my life when I can be the catalyst for a lot of conflict-prone situations. Sometimes it's as simple as being the only openly gay dude sitting in a fundamentalist congregation and wondering how people are going to probably freak out about it. It's not that I don't want to start a fight. I'm just being myself. And I have this crazy idea that I can do, and I can go to whatever place I want to as long as it's open to the public. Another example of me being a constant problem is where I am allowed to take a place of visibility, where I am momentarily recognized as being undeniably underrated in the midst of those who are overrated. This is where little secret wars start to break out, and the following events typically happen. Subtle efforts that are either overlooked or socially acceptable occurred that undermine my ability to work while causing the popular people to get away with taking the spotlight, as long as the audience either doesn't notice or doesn't care. After all, the audience will probably protect their idols because they, for lack of a better term, have shiny feathers. When anyone or anything gets in the way of our beloved shiny cocks, it can be surreal, the things that can happen. Years ago, in a small town, I was allowed to sit in with an acoustic set at a restaurant patio. It looked like all the channels were being used on the PA system. When I plugged in my instrument into the old and confusing PA system, instead of it combining my signal with the other signal, it canceled it out. This made everyone think that I was literally turning off someone's playing in addition to being heard. Instead of them asking about it or even noticing what actually happened, one of the relatives got angry and invited me to a private office and was verbally abusive to me. In fact, that mental health organization's office had nothing to do with the restaurant or the music. It was just someone abusing their authority in a different setting. So why such cruelty over such a tiny mishap? These other people were not professional musicians. They were amateurs, and from what I could tell, probably self-taught and had nothing wrong with that. Sadly, I suffered a lifetime of powerful and popular people whose hobbies are some sort of attempt to get attention from others while acting like they're in some type of creative career. It's one thing to have had a professional background while being featured along with hobbyists, but to have the hobby people upstage the professionally trained has been a very common occurrence, in addition to the fact that these powerful people will humiliate, demote, devalue, and basically do whatever they can get away with to remain in the spotlight. This is how righteous anger is protecting their gods, in addition to the fact that I am trying to work alongside with little gods themselves. It's obvious that throughout history, people get very angry, even to the point of killing and starting wars. When they feel the need to come to the defense of their gods. We have also seen this up close for those of us who have been close to religious extremists. But what about the gods themselves? They have a history of doing a lot of really mean stuff to those who are not 100% committed to them. Whether or not these accounts are true or not, these voices inspired people to write about what happens if you disobey Mr. Yahweh or whoever. If you pick up a stick on the wrong day of the week, you die. Having worked in various forms of media and entertainment, on and off for decades, I find it nearly impossible to talk about what actually happens behind the scenes trying to work with these people. For the most part, they are cruel and unmerciful. Their behavior reminds me of a hardcore substance abuser. A drug addict or an alcoholic might seem one of the most compassionate and honest people you'd ever met until you get in the way of their next fix. They need that in order to survive from their perspective. It's their livelihood. It's their reason for living. It's as if you've taken away the very air they breathe. This is the same way with power. It's the most addictive substance on earth. Once you've tasted power, you have to have more. One of the stupid things that people say has to do with absolute power corrupting. Power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Although people always seem to misquote this statement, coined by Lord Acton, I have always heard it in the context of politics, especially the over-centralization of power. In my opinion, power actually corrupts everyone in whatever amount is given, whether it is absolute power or not. Power is poison to everyone in power and those who are under anyone's power. One life form having power over another is something that should be reserved for animals. And at the same time, it can be the only way for some people in some places to get along with each other. With the exception of political power or anyone in a position of authority, it's influence that is the big issue when it comes to power. And thus influence doesn't always have an official and recognized title and office. I was raised in an era before this wonderful little monster we call social media. When I was a kid, you could put a number on rich persons, based on their liquid and solid assets. You may even put some kind of scoring on how many kids voted for them in a certain class president candidate and how many peers show up to their heavy metal vomit party. But in recent generations, we have something that some would call social scoring. Hey, this next part will also be on your exam. Although I have met people who have successful careers in media and entertainment who might not have a very impressive web presence, their employers make up for it sometimes. In addition, there are some social media users who might have accidentally gotten some of their media to go viral, or they created or stole it, but had little to nothing to maintain with their followers or even wanted to get high numbers. So there are definitely exceptions to whether all powerful leaders have the social scoring to match their influence and vice versa. I do find this more of an issue with the younger generations, and some of these influencers do not even have a career associated with their web presence. They might just be super popular alpha type people who just get a lot of attention no matter what they do online or in person. I have met a lot of social media influencers in recent years, especially on my extended tour throughout most of the United States, as much of their attitudes were mostly offensive and often hurtful. I did find it fascinating that the types of behaviors were associated with different numbers. For instance, let's say that a particular influencer had views, likes, comments, and followers in the thousands, and their various posts and profiles. They might not seem very reachable in person unless you had some kind of insider advocate for you. Their ranks in social situations nearly always matched their social media numbers. The ones in the tens of thousands had certain traits and privileges, while those in the hundreds of thousands and millions had more and more. The best example I can think of in my life when it comes to meeting influencers was early in my extended tour. I spent a part of the winter just before the plague, camping around other nomads in the desert in Arizona and California. These gatherings also happen to draw a lot of these influencers. Although I have tried over the years to work with people like that, I have never seen so many of them in such a short period of time. It got to the point where all I needed to do was approach one of them, take a few seconds to get a feel for their attitude, and try to guess what kind of numbers they might have. It was as sad as it was funny. Other observations included that these influencers demonstrated little to no character, responsibility, nor did they really have much to offer, in my opinion, when it came to their content relating to their numbers. In fact, the greater the numbers, the worse the content was, and the worse the people were. That was another common trait that I observed. I also know a lot of followers of these kinds of people. Some of them actually have some informative and perhaps even entertaining material, but most of them are just alpha-type people using their power in conjunction with their social media algorithms in order to benefit. I find it disturbing when I feel pressured to follow these influencers, and this happens a lot. I have even been approached by older people who stick their phone in my face and wanting me to watch some stupid video or picture. It's as if they want me to worship the same gods as they do. When I refuse, things can sometimes get awkward. But when I begin to show them my own content, things can get downright ugly. One time I was camping next to a big family reunion, and we were sharing funny music that was playing through our phones through a Bluetooth speaker. I decided to have them look up one of my comic songs that was published on their streaming service, and they did not even recognize me in the picture. They liked the music, and after a while, when I finally told him I had produced the music, they got very uncomfortable. That's when they refused to listen to any more of my music and insisted instead on playing anything but mine, no matter how horrible the music was. It was a bizarre experience, and in addition to being very hurtful, one of the songs they wanted me to listen to was just a voice and a guitar and 3 chords and a repetitive melody that sounded like it was written by a 7th grader. Their attitude was so forceful and intrusive, as if it was some kind of unspoken message behind that kind of behavior. It would have sounded like this: we have our own gods that we give our attention to, and how dare you do something better than they do? I started noticing this trend when I was talking to some colleagues several years ago in my hometown, and I told them about this particular project I was thinking about launching. The rest of the conversation was dominated by people telling me that I needed to follow these other things that they thought were similar. Every time I tried to bring up what I was doing, I was met with the fact that they believed that I was not supposed to be seen and heard. I was supposed to follow others. At first, I assumed what they were doing was to get me inspired by seeing if another artist was doing something somewhat similar, and that somehow it would empower me to launch a particular project. What I needed was for them to actually listen to what I was proposing, get their feedback, their support, and hopefully prompt them to help me network with others. After a while, when I would meet these people again, I was reminded to check out this same particular popular artist. I had no idea at the time what was going on. Now I have come to recognize as they were higher ranking than me. They saw me as having no right to get any attention for my accomplishments. They had their gods of entertainment that they not only gave their attention to, but they somehow think that they need to proselytize. In addition, by influencing me to do something they want me to do is also reinforcing their ranking over me. Unfortunately, at the time, though, all of this nonsense only caused me to plunge deeper into depression, not realizing what was going on. After I started standing up to these pushy people, I started trying to make sense out of it, only to be met by their confusion and anger. During my tour, I was performing a short series of private meditative live music events. One of my neighbors was a retired doctor who had an interest in such things and acted excited about what I was doing and refused to support or even attend any of my sessions. In fact, the management made it nearly impossible for me to advertise as opposed to some ridiculously amateur strum idiot who happened to be rich and powerful. He got VIP treatment, although he was the type of phony who would forget the words, chuckle, and stop halfway through a song while his friends admired him. To make things even more absurd, one time close to one of my meditative sessions, I was inviting an older woman who suddenly changed the subject. It turned out that the retired doctor had drawn everyone over to his place in order to broadcast a live stream of some hotshot name dropper with a loop station. I tried to reason with her that I'm being told to attend a virtual event instead of a live event that I am performing free of charge to everyone staying at the resort, and why does that make any sense? It should have been the other way around. Although I didn't raise my voice in anger, nor did I hurl insults, she reacted in shock, as if I was not supposed to stand up for myself and my work. Before I started thinking about attention economy caste system dynamics, these experiences would drive me into despair and eventually into self-harm. I began to learn more, observe more, until these constant encounters would cause anger, and I would defend myself no matter how it might ruin my reputation. It should make me angry. These people are contributing to my career being ruined, killing my dreams, and at the same time enabling those with too much attention to gain more power. After a long period of time of empowering myself during these constant losing arguments, I have finally come to a conclusion that I am dealing with basically cult members and cult leaders. That's what they act like when they want to divert my attention from my own work and onto those influencers. They also have other cult-like traits, like being overly defensive, not listening, interrupting, strange methods of eye contact, either too much or none at all, and sometimes even asking trick questions. It got to the point where, to protect my own sanity and to stop casting my pearls, a New Testament reference, in addition to the fact that trying to get people to see this constant elephant in the room was only making them confused and upset, as if I was trying to startle a sleepwalker. Trying to awaken someone who is sleepwalking can be traumatic and even dangerous for them. The sleepwalker could fall over and get hurt. They could get so scared that they could start attacking everyone around them. Reality can be really offensive things for people who are out of touch with it. These influencers, these leaders, these alphas who are constantly working hard to get as many people as they can to be placed and to remain in a trance-like state, they want everyone around them to watch the things they are watching and listen to the things they are listening to. The media has become our worship, and these so-called creators have become their gods. Anyone who dares not to only divert people's attention over to someone who is being ignored is considered a heretic. And if this ignored person happens to be creating something more valuable, that's the worst crime of all. I have countless stories of personal accounts, in addition to others, where followers insisted on giving their attention to those based on power and popularity, and can be unusually aggressive in the process. Things get even more strange when the actual leaders are present, and the weirdest thing about all these experiences has to do with the fact that I simply shouldn't be talking about such things. There's also the fact that nobody seems to want to engage in such conversations, nor follow through, even when I happen to be the one trying to advocate for someone who I have discovered to be valuable and invisible. Whether I'm talking about myself or another contributor, it's spooky how people react. A recent experience where I was advocating for a very gifted and very ignored visual artist. The expression on this woman's face was like seeing a UFO and like utter denial. I have really hit a nerve with this. Other unusual things about repeating experiences that these environments transcend race, economic class, urban and rural, and a few of these stories are where I was with people who identified as far right-wing, especially the family next to my campsite listening to that comedy music that I stated earlier. When it comes to the subject of who's got a hold of people's attention, this is a widespread concern that touches every kind of community that I have ever come in contact with. In early forms of civilization, it didn't take long before the leaders found that if they were worshipped and regarded as gods, they could gain more power. As these empires grew in size, the dependency and addiction to power caused these leaders to do whatever they had at the time in order to further enslave their people. Religion was one of their tools, in addition to fear, deception, although the written word played a positive role in preserving history. It was also used to distort history and cause these influencers to be remembered as gods. Sadly, a lot of these mortal men and women are, for the most part, still regarded as gods, unless history happened to predominantly record them just as human leaders. Their immortal nature was penned in ancient literature and enabled by fabricating and exaggerating various stories. In a lot of ways, a lot of these people rose to power not just because of their family-based privileges of luck, but many of them did have a way with others. I would imagine that some of these leaders were remarkably good-looking and might have even developed skills and talents that, in addition to all their charisma, power, popularity, and privileges, could impress simple people to the point where they appeared as superhuman. I can further elaborate on what I know about con artists, mentalists, and those manipulators who use psychological tactics to bedazzle their victims. We can only imagine what these people were really like. For those of us who believe in the supernatural, or whether they employed additional tactics that made them channel other voices, relying on occult practices, is something that a lot of leaders had relied on for thousands of years to even further bewitch their followers. There were countless leaders throughout oral and written history who were what I would reluctantly call an asshole. Every time I hear anything called Apollo this or Apollo that, even venerating the original Hippocratic Oath, I can't help but think, if Apollo was actually a real dude, did they recognize what a total asshole that guy was?